Hello, and welcome to podcast Mixtape. It's a series of live events hosted by WNYC and the Green Space. I'm Jami Floyd. I'm senior editor of WNYC's newly formed Race and Justice Unit. And for the month of November, we wanted to talk with someone who's been confronting this historic political moment with a spirit of agency, responsibility, and positivity. So in the months leading up to Tuesday's election, I think we all felt some level of helplessness, but our guest, Baratunde Thurston, has been working to counter that feeling by exploring what it means to act and citizen. That's right, to citizen as a verb. How to Citizen with Baratunde launched in August 2020, and it's featured intimate conversations with thought leaders, revolutionaries, activists, experts, all about the power we wield as a collective and the tangible actions we can take to use it. A little later in the show, Baratunde will be joined by his guest, Farai Shadea, to talk about this moment in which we sit, this post-election moment. But first, I welcome Baratunde to the Green Space. Baratunde Thurston, thank you so much for being with us.
Jami Floyd, thank you for having me. And I heard your title. I think it was Supreme Allied Commander of Race and Justice. Well done. We've needed one of those for hundreds of years. So
that's right. That's how I'm citizening. Is that how you conjugate that verb?
Absolutely. That's the gerund version of the new verb to citizen. Citizening. Well done.
You have coined the new verbiage. So why don't I begin by asking you how you decided to focus on how to citizen?
I was very tired. That's how. I was tired of the news being very disempowering, very anger-inducing, but not action-orienting. So it was building up in me like poison, rage and frustration and loneliness. And I suspected I wasn't alone and that there would be a way to shift the lens and the attention from diagnostic, of which there is plenty, toward people doing things that are helping address some of the problems that we're facing in our society. Could we point the lens and the microphones at those people to feel better about it? And then could I give people some things to do to be a part of that better feeling, not just the screaming into the pillow at night? So personal, like many efforts in life, but also shared, because I knew I wasn't alone in that.
What I love about this is your choice of citizen as a verb. Oh, wait, not choice, your creation of citizen as a verb. Of course, you are so well known for your brilliant How to Be Black, but here you chose to make citizen a verb. It's not how to be a citizen. What took you to that choice rather than how to be a citizen? Why the active use of citizen as a verb?
Being a citizen, there's some weight associated with that that's not entirely positive. It's less inclusive because of the legal status associated with being a citizen. And I struggled with the language for the title of this show across multiple forms of media over many years. Should I grab that word that has led to armed people grabbing humans and deporting them forcefully? And at the end, I thought, okay, this is not about status, being. It's about doing. And we can interpret it as a verb. And there are people who are residents, there are people who are members of, there are people who are part of. They may not have a legal status as citizen, but they are living up to the idea of what it means to be a citizen, what it means to be a citizen, the actions involved. So let's just shorten the distance and let's citizen. And, there was a period of time when the first wave of violent and shocking deportations of the Stephen Miller variety came around. And I remember this town somewhere in Illinois, and they, very conservative area, and they got upset because the government had come for their Mexican. They're like, we hate Mexicans, but not Jose. He's a member of our community. He runs this restaurant. He donates to the police association and coaches Little League. Get rid of all those Mexicans, but not our Mexican. Jose, name adjusted, was citizening, even though he lacked the formal paperwork to certify his legal status as a citizen. And I thought, okay, well, there's a lot of people out there citizening who don't have the papers. Let's focus on the act and not the status.
And you, of course, mentioned Stephen Miller, special advisor to the president, who is behind so much of President Trump's immigration status policies and focuses so much on the status of people rather than their humanity. And we sit here, Baratunde, waiting for an outcome in the presidential election, but you began this project before election day, but clearly anticipating that we would be at this moment. Did you expect that we would have to wait for it to unravel, to unwind, to resolve, if you will? Are you prepared for what might be a bit of a marathon rather than a sprint, and that it might take us to the steps of the U.S. Supreme Court? What are you expecting?
I am a big fan of Leslie Odom Jr. So yeah, I was prepared to wait for it. And, you know, I listened to Michelle Obama, who told us to bring lunch and dinner to line to vote. So this outcome isn't entirely surprising. The president telegraphed, hopefully outgoing president telegraphed, he wanted to drag this out and tie this up in court. I had brief dreams of an overwhelming rebuke of a human being who none of us would want anyone we love to emulate. I did entertain that fantasy. And then I remembered I'm in the United States of America. And this is also the country that elected that guy, who had a long public record of malfeasance. And it would have been a bit too fantastical for me to expect an instant rebuke after so much investment in such ugly rhetoric and action. So I'm not a predictor, but I was expecting and braced for emotionally multiple outcomes. I hoped for a landslide. I didn't expect it would come. I feared for a set of scenarios which would chill the blood, and am relieved temporarily and still hopefully that we are not approaching that ugly end of the spectrum either. And so we are within 48 hours of the polls closing, and it's a COVID year. Nothing's happened on time. I am impressed with us, we the people who showed up and broke records. Every demographic group, including people I do not agree with, showed up. And that's the point. So good for us.
And you are, your career has, you mentioned the many platforms, comedy, stand-up comedy, news, punditry, writing, of course, for print and digital and television and radio. How does your language change, especially when you're working to express thought and feeling and criticism in a moment like this? How does it change depending on the medium you're speaking in? When you reach for the words you need to express the moment in which you stand, especially a moment like this one, when you try to help people think about how to citizen in a moment like this?
The writing came earliest in my life. I called myself a writer before an orator. They've started to merge in terms of my process, but writing always gives me the editing opportunity. And I really like that.
Was that even before stand-up comedy?
Yeah. I mean, I started writing with a level of volunteerism and joy in a high school for the high school newspaper. That was the beginning. And then it really started to strike a chord inside of me in college. I started a satirical email newsletter and I wrote for the college newspaper, news coverage, but also opinion offering. And so honing that voice through typing, or thinking through my fingertips, things flowed in a certain way. And I really relished the sculpting act of editing, moving this, trimming that, cutting out the fat. And then the verbal words came a little later in terms of the stand-up. I'd always been on stage, but not as much as on the page. And they're starting to blend. So I don't know that there's a dramatic difference across media in terms of how my voice shows up or what my process is. I do know that right now I am more raw than I've been. Mm-hmm. I am more honest than I've been. I had a decent career of public speaking, and companies bring me in to talk about the future or talk about race stuff. And I still get to do that. But in the beginning of COVID, that all disappeared. And it was very travel based, and there was no travel, no gatherings. Everything I did was a super spreader before I knew that word. And then the Zoom world came along, and Zoom held us together, replaced yoga and church and democracy to some extent, just hanging by a tether. And I had to drop all my fancy slides. I used to crush it with my Keynote skills, my Apple Keynote software skills, that is. And I did in Zoom, that doesn't work. And so I just learned to talk right here. And it became more intimate, and there was no time. And the stuff I was talking about after Derek Chauvin slowly murdered George Floyd live in front of all of us, didn't leave room for any level of BS or dishonesty. Mm-hmm. So I have landed heavier and more solidly in me this year. And I think that transcends the medium that I'm operating in.
Yeah, a lot more intimacy in Zoom, yeah. But
I'm in your living room right now.
Yes, you are. Yes, you are. And a lot of other living rooms.
I've been in people's kitchens. It was the fun part, talking to kids is the best, high school kids. And one kid was in his bedroom, and he had a big Budweiser thing on the back. And I'm like doing the math. I'm okay, you're about 15 years old. Hey, Jimmy, does your parents know you got a big beer poster on the wall behind you?
Right. Like kids' bedrooms are the best.
Yeah.
But you've always had this great sense of humor, even when talking about very, very serious things. Does that still, even in this moment, this tragically difficult time for us as a nation, does that still undergird you? Does it still help see you through? I'm now asking you a personal question, less about your work and more about what sustains your spirit.
Ooh. The humor helps me. I am my first audience member. I make myself laugh, and that's for me. And it's often a benefit if someone else feels the same. It helps keep me sane. And to spot the absurdity in moments is really a mental health survival tool. And that's true for a lot of people across a lot of ages, a lot of races, a lot of times. It's true for me now. The beginning of COVID, I still remember how I knew this is different. Something is happening. It was Friday the 13th of March. So you should have known something. It's Friday the 13th, expect weird stuff. And I go to the Whole Foods, and they ran out of kale, Jamie. Whole Foods. Whole Foods ran out of, are you still Whole Foods if you don't have kale?
That's
it's like
right.
An existential challenge. And the level of near riotous looting behavior I witnessed from white women in yoga pants, they say the black people are the rioters and the looters. At the Burbank Whole Foods on No Kale Day has a different story. So that's true, and it happened, but I had to find a way. I've done comedy shows through COVID because it helped me process what was going on. I was like, I hope people show up. I'm charging like $5 to try to make a buck, but I just had to go back through the headlines and the experiences and the absurdity and find a new way to interpret it that wasn't strictly painful.
Speaking of pain, let's talk about social media.
That's a
A lot
great
of pain
segue.
there.
That's why you do what you do.
A lot of pain there. You are a person who does effectively, and I think with a lot of positivity, use social media to get your message out there, even when it's on topics that can be difficult. But I want to talk with you about the ways in which social media can be weaponized to target people, to cancel people, or even to spread false information, incite violence. Where do you see social media going in the next weeks and months, and I would say even years? What is your hope and maybe even your fears when looking at our social media universe?
I have more fears here than hope in the near term.
Right.
We're in a challenged place, and social media sits atop an exploitative and extractive business model that literally isolates us from each other, segments us in little tiny buckets of hyper personalization and echoing, monetizes us by mining us and selling us back to ourselves. That's not a healthy ecosystem to begin with. It doesn't have to lead to terrible things, but it's not a surprise to me that it does. And the storytelling and corrupt or sad or hurt communities that gather in these spaces have free reign to pile on each other. The disinformation, misinformation, conspiracy theory, it's wild. And the internet has empowered a bunch of people who previously couldn't gather in this particular way. You know, the internet offers community and amplification to anyone now. And those were both withheld from almost everyone in the not too distant past. And so when you extend that, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, but I'm describing the cost, then we have a price to pay. Right. And previously fringe groups who felt alone and muted now don't. Right. And they feel bolstered and in community, and that has devastating impact. So seeing the intentional campaigns against Joe Biden, for example, no interest in facts, and watching that get laundered out of tiny pockets of social media into larger pockets of mainstream media, into the psyche and conscience of a nation, as poison. And I don't see that stopping. In part, and I'll just end on this, every type of human is capable of succumbing to a lie, of investing in an untruth that serves some other need, some psychological need in them. Me too, you too. Like, however, in the United States right now, we have one half of our political establishment embodied formally by the Republican Party, which has actively embraced it. For 4 years, they enabled it at the highest levels. It trickled down, not bottom up. And that's still the party. And they've unleashed something with power, not somebody in their basement, somebody with the nuclear codes, tweeting out conspiracy theories against the republic for which he's supposed to stand. And a whole political party, the party of Lincoln, did that. So we're still in that country, and we still have that party. And they're sending QAnon folks to the new Congress. That's not good for any of us.
I like to talk about Lincoln. He keeps bringing up Lincoln.
Yeah.
Speaking of the parties, glad you brought him up. Where do you see the party system going? The Democrats, the Republicans, this was a mess.
Yeah.
These last 4 years, both parties seem to be, I mean, you're the one that I'm interviewing you, but let me just say, both parties seem to be in crisis. What do you think, Baratunde? How to citizen?
Yeah.
These party leaders really need to take that word and think about it as a verb, don't they?
They do, from all sides. You've got folks taking money from a few, lavishing attention on a few and forgetting their job on behalf of the many.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a long running thing. And there's a level of structural corruption, legal bribery that we have in this country. A very short list of a few tweaks would add some integrity to our democracy, our small d democracy. Real campaign finance and canceling Citizens United and public funding of our campaigns so that companies and the very wealthy can't buy so much time of the people who are hired to represent all of us. They work for us. So let's do that. The gerrymandering. People should pick their politicians. Politicians should not pick their people. That's not how this should work. We literally have it backwards. And we're not representative because of that. The Electoral College, established to elevate the power of slaveholding Southern states who did not want a popular vote to count against them because they didn't count people like us as human at the time. So we got to do away with that. And there's even questions around the Senate because so many of our distributions of population is getting concentrated into fewer and fewer states. So Idaho has outsized influence over the course of this nation. So you work on those, nonpartisan districting, campaign financing, abolish the Electoral College, and perhaps at least reform the Senate, if not completely do away with the selection structure. Then you have a new view. And Joe Biden likes to say this is a battle for the soul of America. And it might be, but more humbly, I submit it is a battle for the representation of the soul of America in a political system with integrity. Our soul is largely intact. Most public sentiment measures show we want most of the same things. The fringe is over there, but they're running the game right now. And so we need to align our political system with our values, not the other way around.
When you say the fringe is over there, but we want most of the same thing, and I did hear you say earlier when you talked about, 48 hours after the election, here we are, patience, wait and see. And I agree with all that. But I hear so many people today expressing surprise that the election was as close as it was.
Yeah.
In the middle of COVID, after all of the protests, after the zaniness of the last 4 years, after impeachment, I could go on. But I don't have all night. I got to pass you on to the brilliant next guest on How to Citizen with whom you are going to speak. But I want to ask you, are you surprised at how close it was, given how divided we are in this moment?
I think I'm disappointed, and I want more for us. I want it to not be so hard. I bet if you asked people on a list of things that happened in 2020, they wouldn't even list impeachment. That was also this year. And the protests and the fires and the hurricane and the 230,000 plus of us who are not here because of a pandemic, that we could have done a lot more to fight. And so it seems so obvious. Surprise is hard to acknowledge because I think I let myself naively be surprised a bit in 2016. And you realize, okay, we're in this kind of permission space. And we had a set of norms where it was impermissible to behave a certain way in public. People thought it, but they didn't do it in public. They hid in a dark corner of the internet. They literally met in a basement, but they didn't fly that freak flag publicly because there was embarrassment associated with it, because there was social costs associated with it. And the past 4 years under this president have ripped the lid off of that. And I grew up with the truth of the country. I was very Black and very America since 1977. And my mother did not let me suffer the foolish mythologies of this land, believing we're the land of the free and the home of the brave and it's all good. It's not. I knew better. And still I had hope. You know, and I saw what they did to Obama, and still I had hope. And to have those 8 years followed by this flagrant embrace of things that we absolutely just know are not right is very painful, but it's very revealing. This president gave permission to, and the Republican Party is not just him. You know, there's everybody who ever worked for him and covered for him and lied for him and confirmed him. They have made it okay. It's not aberrant anymore. So even my language, there's a fringe over there. They're not over there. They're in the Defense Department, in the White House, in the intelligence service, it's everywhere. And it's cool. And they're in schools with our kids. And so it's very sad and it's very real. And we have tens of millions of people that we're in relationship with who are not all waving the same freakish flag. They're not all trying to run a campaign bus off the road, but they're associated with that and not embarrassed enough by it to disassociate from it. Some have. The Republican Party is shrinking, technically, but that vote count is real. And they weren't embarrassed out of casting it. So what now?
Well, what now is exactly the last question I want to ask you before we move on to the next part of this conversation tonight. Your first guest on How to Citizen said, quote, "What do we do? What our generation does." Let me start again because I want to get the quote precisely right. And this is Valerie Kaur, by the way. She said, "What we do, what our generation does, not just between now and November, but past November," so starting now, Baratunde, "matters. How we citizen matters for the future of Earth and for the future of humanity." So that was her quote. And now here we are, Baratunde, after the election. So to pick up on your last answer, where do we go from here? Quoting Dr. King, quoting others. What should individuals, in your view, to your view, how do we citizen? What should we be doing from this day forward?
We need to recommit to each other. We need to recommit to the experiment that we're still in. It's just an experiment. There's no guarantees for its long-term success. The experiment of self-government. We need to recommit to that. We need to embody the values of what it means to citizen, the things that drive our show but are not about our show. We need to show up and participate all day, every day, not just every 4 years like an Olympics fan or a World Cup fan. We need to remember our connection to each other and build on those relationships and listen and invest and decide, do we want to be right or do we want to be effective? And those are micro choices that every relationship will evoke from us. There's no blanket answer to that. We shouldn't suffer needlessly, but we shouldn't have a blanket dismissal constantly either. So we need each other. We truly do. Evolutionarily speaking, humans alone are humans insane. We need to understand the power we have. And it shows up in so many ways. There's voting, there's money, there's gathering, there's ideas. And we need to pull the levers of those powers constantly. And we need to remember that we have strength when we do this stuff together. And that we don't have to hold on to the ways that were handed to us. I think, we grow up in a nation and in a culture, but mostly we grow up in a story of what is and what should be. And those aren't based on laws of physics and nature. They're based on humans. Humans wrote a story of white supremacy. Humans wrote a story of extractive capitalism that destroys the only planet we've ever known. We got Google Docs, we can edit. We can write something new. And so I want people to remember to believe in the possibility of us and not to act like it's simple. I am not preaching ease, but I am preaching possibility. And these things are cyclical, ultimately. We've been in very, very dangerous, dark, violent places before. We will be there again. but it is not the permanent state of things. So have faith in the cycle as well.
Well, I think that message of faith is a wonderful place for you and I to end our conversation and for you to pick it up with your guests. So I want to thank you for taking time to speak with me, Baratunde. And before I hand the microphone, the virtual microphone over to you, I do hope you'll indulge me for a quick announcement.
Yes.
We are very thrilled to bring these shows to our audiences through this pandemic. Unfortunately, it is not without cost. The Green Space and New York Public Radio are a nonprofit organization, and we rely on support from viewers and listeners to keep content coming to you through these very challenging times. So if you are in a position to make a donation tonight, we will be very, very appreciative. And we've made it very easy for you. Just jump onto the texting app on your phone and text the word live to 70101. That's the word live to 70101. And we will text you right back with a form where you can make your contribution. And on behalf of everyone at the Green Space and New York Public Radio, we thank you so very much for all of your support of our work. And now, Baratunde Thurston, what a divine pleasure it's been to be with you as always. Would you like to introduce your brilliant guest?
I would love that honor. And Jami Floyd, it's been a pleasure talking with you, not just responding to you. Thanks for sharing your perspective. Thanks for all the work you've done. You've been in my head for years as a very loyal listener to and supporter of WNYC and public media in general. So congrats on the new gig. Thanks so much. And it's been a real joy to hang with you.
Thank you.
All right, we are shifting gears. It's the relay race of Zoom hosting. I'm Baratunde Thurston, now in the sort of co-driving seat, I think is what's going to happen here. If you've just tuned in, first of all, thank you. I've heard our outgoing president is ranting and raving nonsensically, unlike everything else he's done over the past 4 years. Why do we keep showing up expecting different things? Are we collectively insane? Let's move forward. And I can't think of a better person to do that with than Farai Chideya. I'm not burying the name. I want to say the name up top and tell you a brief story about why I wanted to do this with her of all the humans in our nation. Farai was in my head for a long time as she hosted so many different programs, but the first being a show called News and Notes, a show about the Black experience, about politics, about the United States. And when I was a wee blogger, remember blogs? They were like Twitter threads, but in one place. They were like Instagram posts, but you could link to them because it was on the real internet. Anyway, enough of my ranting about technology. I'm old. Back in the blogging days, I was young and worked with a woman named Cheryl Conti on a site called Jack and Jill Politics. And Farai was the first person to put me on. Repeatedly. Like some people invited me, but never invited me back. Farai's like, you should come back. And so I got practice on these microphones. And she is so capable of not only hosting conversations, but doing reporting herself. She has covered presidential elections. She has written too many books to list, but go to bookshop.org or some other non-Bezos owned property and search for Farai and buy everything. Just click buy all. She is currently hosting a new podcast called Our Body Politic, which centers not just the experiences of women of color in our politics, but the practice of power of those people who have been so used and abused and taken for granted. She puts them in the spotlight, in the driver's seat where they deserve to be. So let's shine some spotlight. Let's let her co-drive with me. A journalist, a funder, a writer, an entrepreneur. She even worked at Etsy for a while. I remember that, Farai. Farai Chideya, welcome. Come on down. How you doing?
Baratunde, it is so good to be with you in this crazy moment in history. I have to say, this was pretty much where I thought we'd be. I thought we would have some kind of election season, not just an election night that was called. I always have thought that Trump voters have had incredible superpowers of communication. So last election, I was covering voters for 538, and one of the things that you have to understand about the Trump message is that it can be anything. The way that the president, current president, then candidate operated in the 2016 election was he just let his supporters say whatever they wanted. So if you wanted to say, Mexicans should be deported, you said that. If you wanted to say he's bringing back the steel mills, you could say that. If you want to say he's going to change the Supreme Court, you could say that. Whatever you wanted to sell, you could sell. And those are some of the less crazy things that were used as selling points. And so it's basically like, what we are seeing is the fruition of an era of so-called alternative facts, which is otherwise known as lying. But we're in a full-on culture war, and people are believing whatever they want to believe. And this is what you get when white supremacy mixes with anti-trutherism. Yeah. It's just where we are. So I'm not shocked. I think that Biden will win. The president is, talking right now about how he's been robbed, apparently, how there was some voter suppression on the Biden camp side. But the reality is there may be many more ranty press conferences before we get to the other side of this.
What I want to talk about our body politic. Why did you decide to do this show? I'm borrowing from the Jami Floyd playbook.
Yeah. I love it. Yeah, so first of all, let me just back up to news and notes. It was really such a pleasure to have you on, and we had so many amazing guests, Jelani Cobb, et cetera. And I feel like when I do a radio show that has on, a bunch of different guests in a show, I hope that they go on to do other amazing things. Some of them will have already done amazing things. Some of them won't. I mean, in terms of being on air in the media, but I want to be that place where people are discovered by other people so that they can use their own power to build their own brands or their own career trajectories. And so one of the things when I said, let me put together, I thought it would be a podcast, and it's both a podcast and a radio show because our partners are KCRW, KQED, KPCC, all out in California.
West Side? I'm coming to you from LA right now, so I know all those letters.
And I really like your apartment, and I like your fist.
Thank you.
All good. But yeah, I did it because, as I like to say, women of color are on the save your own ass plan. We are not waiting for anybody to save our asses but ourselves. We're not waiting for Lil Wayne to save our ass. We're not waiting for Donald Trump to save our ass. And so as someone who, I'm currently in Maryland, I want to spend some more time with my mom who lives here, but I live in Brooklyn most of the time. And in my building in Crown Heights, 5 people died in the first month of the pandemic alone. This is a building with lots of essential workers, lots of retirees, lots of Black people. And I was like, look, what can I do to be part of the Save Your Own Ass plan? And I'm like, well, what I do is news and information. Let me do some of that because we've got to save our own lives. Nothing is promised right now.
I want to take this moment for the audience. If you have questions, topics, you want to hear from Farai or me or both on, put them in the comments, the chat of wherever you're watching this, and they will find their way to us through the magic of the internet. So in the show, Farai, what have you gotten out of it since making it? That was the plan, that was the goal. Right. What have you taken from it?
Well, at first I remembered making radio is hard. I was like, dag, and it's not my only job. I do multiple things as you do multiple things. And when you do multiple things, you're just like, wait, where's the tennis ball? But really what I learned is that working with a team that is led by women of color is magical. My producer is Zuleika Lantigua Williams, who runs her own production company. And she's a Dominican immigrant and total badass and just amazing person. And the producers are very diverse. You've got Latinas and Black men and white women. And, it's just like we are manifesting the future of information that we want to see. And so that has been, even when it's been like crushingly difficult to juggle everything, it's like, actually, we are being able to produce more culturally competent, fact-based information that is a lot less hot-takey than, like my former employers. But let me just say, when 538 published, oh, there's no shy Trump voters 2 days before this election when like the polls were crushed. Yeah. I was like, facepalm, did you learn nothing? Facepalm.
Yeah.
Like what? Like why even go there? Just don't go there.
Yeah, my shorter version of that is ignore Nate Silver, but I can say that.
I'm with you.
You mentioned Lil Wayne earlier.
Yeah.
And so I want to give a brief amount of oxygen to the handful of formerly relevant rappers who came out in a last-ditch effort to endorse a man who had no problem calling for the deaths of the child versions of these same men. Yep. How did you interpret that moment? How did the people that you're working with in our body politic and in your world in general, how did you process that?
Yeah, we actually, so Erin Haynes, editor-at-large at the 19th, is a regular contributor, and we did an election special conversation with her and Jess Morales-Roqueto, who's at the National Domestic Workers Alliance and who's been a longtime political strategist. And basically what we talked about was that this was just meant to confuse. It was meant to basically make Black men and other people just really think, wow, I have no good options. And that's not why these rappers did it, but that it was part of a sort of chaos strategy of trying to distract Black voters. And I do believe Black voters should have a choice between at least two and hopefully more political parties. But at some point, you have to face the reality that one party has a very different values your life very differently than the other. I wish we had two parties that valued Black lives highly. Sometimes I wonder if we even have one, to be real. But what I think was in it for the rappers was just juice, like I'm gonna come on, I'm gonna floss, I'm gonna make the newspapers, but not really thinking, your reference was of course to the Central Park Five, who Donald Trump as a private citizen hounded mercilessly. And one of my formative newsroom experiences was being one of the few people in my newsroom at the time who was like, what happened to presumed innocent during Central Park Five? Because I was working in an almost all white newsroom, and it was just like, everyone was down with the plan to just talk about wilding, and not thinking about what was our role in the media in railroading these young men. And even if they had been guilty, the way that we reported on it was not good journalism, And so to look at, the slew of rappers, the one who will now forever be in my mind, 20 Cent.
You got discounted.
He discounted himself.
To pile on for a second, I think of 20 Cent. I love that as the unacknowledged founder of mumblecore hip hop as well, and I don't know if he's gotten the due credit for that. But, we can find him in a club. So keep going.
I also think, let's face it, there was a lot of misogyny that was behind that. There's a lot of people, not all of them men, and not all of them white, who identify with what they see as the bravado of grab them by the pee, You know, it's like, to some people that's bravado. There used to be, think about all the movies in which there were rape scenes that were completely unironic.
Yeah.
You know, it's just like, oh, well, that's a man taking what he wants. People who yearn for the days when a woman could be raped and you could applaud, maybe like our president a little bit more than some people.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm just laying it out there. I think misogyny was really hard to quantify in the last election, but I interviewed plenty of women who just had an allergy to Hillary Clinton because she was a woman. And, you know, it was really interesting to interview them. And I'm not saying that they should have voted for Hillary Clinton, but what I'm saying is that their opposition to her was so clearly rooted in a lack of ability to process the idea of a woman as president. And so, you know, this is a case where you have two white men running against each other, but one is perceived as having bravado by some people. You know, that's, I guess, if that's how you express it.
Yeah. Yeah, that Bolsonaro machismo. I'll fight COVID myself. You know?
Yeah.
You've been in so many different iterations of journalism across media and across eras of technology. And so we're in a weird media environment, to understate it a little bit. We've got increasingly partisan leaning outlets. We've got fringes within fringes. You know, you can go from what used to be 4chan and end up on One America and end up on Fox and end up on Breitbart and end up in policy at the cabinet level. And you've got whatever CNN is today, you got MSNBC clearly over here, and so much information. So I guess broadly, how do you interpret the quality and the possibility of journalism to inform the people, which is critical to our democracy? How do you interpret how is journalism doing? What even is journalism in this era?
Too often I say to myself, stuck on stupid. That's what that's
SOS.
You know, yeah, absolutely. You know, and what I mean by that is things like the shy Trump voter thing, like trying to talk about groups of people that you're not even familiar with. Like, I have taken the time to extensively interview Trump voters. I have taken the time to meet white nationalists and white supremacists face to face, as well as interview them on the phone. I actually want to know what the heck people think and why they think it. And if you're not willing to take those risks and go out on the road, don't assume you know what the heck is going on in this country. I think a lot of armchair journalism and a lot of poll-based journalism is complete BS. And I will admit that even though I felt somewhat disconnected from this election compared to last time, because I wasn't out on the road, you know, I still, like, for example, the way that I curate my Twitter feed is to have a real stream from the far left to the far right of American opinion, and then have, you know, sort of geographic verticals where, you know, I want to know more about, like Zimbabwe and South Africa, where I have family. But my Twitter feed is not an echo chamber. It's not an amen corner. I want to know what the heck the people who might come from me and my people are saying.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been this incredible resistance among journalists who are supposed to be purveyors of information to really understand the complexity of American life, and also the depth of American hatred. When we hate hard. We hate passionately. You know, we are all in. And if we're not willing to look that in the face, I mean, I'll also say that the class-based nature of journalism, both in terms of how audiences get constructed by different networks and stations and publications, but also who is in them. How many working class white people are still in journalism? Very few. Do you know why you couldn't find the shy Trump voters? Because you don't employ any working class white people. You know, how about that? How about employing them? I'm not just out for diversity for Black people or people of color or women of color, although I'm all in on that. But if newsrooms don't hire working class white people, they have no idea what's really going on in this country.
Mm. What do you, in this period of election tabulation, what do you, if you were a program director for all journalism in America?
Oh, I wouldn't want that job. But yes.
if I conscripted you into it,
I like this. I like the construct.
where you determine what's on our screens. What is our experience of this tabulatory moment?
Well, I immediately flashed to a story that I wanted to do but didn't get to, just because, you know, long, complicated story, didn't have the time and couldn't do it with my other job. But what I wanted to do early on was do a magazine piece about a Latino family with a mix of Trump voters and Democrats and non-Trump voting conservatives, and then have Republican and Democratic political analysts analyze what they knew about the family from data, but then all of them sit down together and like, oh, I pegged you as the abuela who thought this, but really you're that. It would be like the super weird breaking the fourth wall reality show. I'd still like to see that. Yeah. I would like to see what happens when you take data scientists, journalists, et cetera, and have them observe from a distance and then have everyone meet up and just really thrash it out on a human level. So somebody can take that idea and run with it because I still want to see it. There's
a friend of mine, Trisha Wong, Brooklyn resident, and she's an ethnographer. Mm-hmm. And so she studies people, she goes into the field, she's done it in Latin America and parts of China and increasingly in the US. And she has an argument for something in the era of big data. She calls for something called thick data, where you go deep because big superficial data is useless. And you actually have to see people in their context and listen to them and not just project onto the abstracted representation of them in your data set. And okay, I'm putting some pieces together.
No, I love this.
You're both in Brooklyn, so we could.
Name again, because I want
Trisha Wong, TRICIA WANG.
Okay, I'm going to check her out because that sounds super interesting. Yeah, I absolutely believe in thick data. I believe, you know, most of my interviews that get boiled down to a little tiny piece when I do political journalism are after I've spent hours with someone, because I want to not just talk to them, but also observe them around the people that give them context. So I will go to the mosque. I will go to the white evangelical mega church. I will go to the place that serves great biscuits. I will go to, you know what I mean? I want to see people in place. Yeah. And that's also something that I will admit has just been really hard this election for anyone. Seeing people in place is just not really done so much anymore. But I also think that there's, even when organizations have resources, it's somehow viewed as a luxury to spend a lot of time with your interview subjects. It shouldn't be a luxury. It should be mandatory when you're really trying to get deep insights, to get that kind of thick data that you're talking about.
Yeah. So we're in the greatest country in the world, super free, super dope, awesome, everything's wonderful. But I want to again borrow from the Jami Floyd playbook in terms of the number of people. Actually, I won't ask for that. What do you see a path toward a less divided America? That's the question. Do you see a path toward that? We can acknowledge we're in a pretty divisive moment, and the polls and the results and all kinds of things are key indicators of that. Do you see any way out? And if so, share what you think that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. We've been saying that for like 4 years now.
So we're still digging. Great.
But I think we are still digging. And I think we're digging to a sort of proxy civil war where there will be some people who die. as a result of weaponized racial resentment and just anger and hatred. You know, I look at the domestic terrorist who wanted to kidnap the governor of Michigan. We'll have some weird stuff like that, and not just to famous people or people in office, but to other people. But I also think that if that happens, it will make some people understand the cost of the way that we're living now. And I think also the pandemic what's interesting is that most of the people who voted for Trump, according to reliable exit polling, and this is not the kind of insight that I doubt, really say that he's good for the economy. And most of the people who voted for Biden were like, we have to end the pandemic. But that too is a very false dichotomy. You can't have a good economy without ending the pandemic. But it's interesting what people hear when they listen. And so I think that the path out would be more deep listening by politicians, journalists, other forms of storytellers, and the kinds of conversations that strengthen us, while we also at a legislative level and a law enforcement level just pull ourselves the heck together so that we don't have an Ahmaud Arbery, so that we don't have people trying to stop vote counting. There is a certain degree of rigor that we just need in protecting basic democracy. American democracy has always been flawed, but unlike some people, I've also believed it could disappear effectively. I've never been one of these people, you know, I mean, I wrote an essay that said, no one lives forever and this country might not either. You know, we are not promised a country. There have been many countries that have started and ended. And the sooner we wrap our brains around that, the sooner we might act right.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder if the path has to involve significantly more pain. And even if that's enough to like maintain the union, I've wondered that. I thought COVID briefly. I was so naive as to think in the beginning of COVID, well, at least the cops can't go around just shooting Black people anymore. I was like, oops.
Yeah, nope.
Like, we're safer at home. Yeah.
And you could be like George Floyd, who was killed while he had COVID.
Yeah.
Someone's knee on his neck.
Gonna get you one way or the other.
The blackest thing ever.
It is the blackest way to die in America.
Yeah. But also what's so Black is the stroll to the polls and Black women and men seizing power, you know, and I can say that about George Floyd, but also recognize the tremendous insights that Black America has just gifted this country with, like consistently and now more so than ever. And I'm proud of us. We're flawed, but we're awesome.
I had thought about what's the appropriate reward for Black America. And it turns out the answer is reparations. But before that, maybe just like a nice vacation.
Yes.
Just like, if you're Black in America, first of all, thank you for believing in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. Yeah. Really appreciate that for the past several hundred years.
Exactly.
And you just take like a whole cycle off, at least 2 years. You know, you don't have to, you have to pay taxes. You don't got to vote. You got to look up nothing. You don't got to work. Just, it's on us. We're good for it because you built us. So, you know.
I love that. That would be so awesome. The Black Batical, like a sabbatical, but Blacker.
Yes, the Black Batical. Oh, we're branding it. This is great. If only we could get this out through a media outlet of some kind.
I know. I know. Yeah. No, I mean, you have to have a sense of humor about it. And
yes, it is.
One of the things I think is going to happen because of politics and because of COVID is that people will find their tribes. You know, people will seek that space where they feel loved and protected if they can. And Unfortunately, that will probably also make America more divided in some ways. If the country is this divided and people start going to where they feel loved and protected, we may actually get more sort of geographically divided, even racially divided along class lines. But there will also be gifts of, sisterhood and brotherhood and family that we get out of it. The question is, how do you break when it literally can cost you your life to go into someone else's house for pleasure or business? And some people have to go for business, home health aides, for example.
Yeah.
Then what does it mean to connect? And whoever can figure out the best ways to connect deserve our gratitude. And speaking of gratitude, I have no gratitude for Facebook, which now is putting in place certain things that they should have put in place ages ago. It's like they're just coming out with some new rules about how you can post and what you can post. Sorry to everybody who works for Facebook. I still have a Facebook account. I have relatives who live in Zimbabwe and South Africa. It's how I get to see pictures of their kids. But I'm very clear, I don't post very much, and I'm very clear that they've made some decisions among many other companies that don't support a healthy democracy. So also, I hope that when we connect, the powerful companies that are allowing us to connect, like Facebook, not limited to Facebook, have an ethical structure for understanding that we cannot just be data mined and thrown to the side, that this is a time where we need an ethical practice of connection. And it's just kind of like a bit of a done deal that we're going to have to use technology to connect in certain ways when we can't do it physically, but we also have to ask for more.
We also have to ask for more. I love it. And I love ethics. I'm very pro ethics. Is there anything you want to add on the topic, the small topic of the United States of America, or the specifics of this electoral moment in the history and future of the United States of America?
Well, in terms of the history and the future, we might not have a future if we don't woman up and man up, human up. This is do or die. And I'm not saying that to be alarmist. I'm saying that because there are many nations which have actually fallen, and we are not that old. Yeah. And the only reason we exist is pretty much sheer willpower and amendments to the Constitution, which, if you're a woman and you're a constitutional originalist, you should stop voting immediately, because you being a constitutional originalist means that you shouldn't have the vote. So that's it, sit down. But,
yes.
Other than that, you know, it's like, I think if we realize that we have so much at stake, but also that we can love ourselves and each other. One of the things that motivates me as a journalist, and that I talk about a bit on the next show that we have that comes up tomorrow, is that agape love motivates my journalism. That is the spiritual love of all human beings. It's what in the Bible, you know, the idea of love thy enemy, that's agape love. You don't have to like your enemy. Mm-hmm. You can still say that your enemy is your enemy, but on some level you recognize that this person is a human being, and the agape love is not about your safety or their safety or who's right or wrong. It's just like, let's love each other, which doesn't mean let people kill you or take away your voting rights, none of that. It just means that on a fundamental level, if we can connect to some sense of love of humanity, while also being very discerning about how we exercise our rights in the courts and at the ballot box, well, that's a winning formula. It's so simple. It's like 1 + 1 = 2. Agape love plus good law equals democracy.
That's it brings us full circle in a way to the earlier part of this event. Jami Floyd quoted the first guest in my podcast with Valerie Kaur, author of See No Stranger, a book everyone should read. And it's premised on revolutionary love. We should love ourselves. We should love others. We should love our opponents, not to our self-destruction, but to raise our humanity.
Yep.
And it's a really beautiful sentiment. And it's also more than that. It's the best way to be, to recognize the stranger as a part of myself I do not yet know, as she so eloquently puts it.
Yeah.
For Rai, this has been a pleasure and an honor. And I thank you also for a brief moment when you said agape love. I thought you meant agave love. And I was like, oh, we doing tequila? Let's go. We got results in? Is there
might be more of that too. Yeah. Well, Baratunde, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for thinking of me.
Yeah. And where what's the best way for people to find your show?
Yes. So if you go to any of the podcatchers like Apple, iHeart, there's like now 5 billion of them. We are there. Our Body Politic, which has been featured in Apple New and Noteworthy and lots of other featured podcast things. And we're also on a bunch of radio stations, including our sponsors, KPCC, KCRW, and KQED. And, you know, dozens of other stations across the country. So it's super exciting. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you. I'll see you in the cloud. Well, this is the cloud too. I used to think I was so clever to say that. Now everything's in the cloud. There's no differentiation whatsoever. Appreciate your contributions to the nation, to the culture, to our souls. It's been real cool. Jami Floyd, thank you for so wonderfully interrogating me. And to WNYC, to the Green Space, to New York City, New York State, the United States of America, Earth, people of Earth.
Earth people.
We're all Earthlings as far as we know. Have a good night. Hang in there. Don't forget to breathe. And let's stay in this. We have to apply constant pressure. That's how this works. Good night, y'all.